Oh, okay, I just need to be able to change the slide at some point. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا زدنا علما اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So I know every day I say that we're going to keep this short, but today I actually mean it. Inshallah, it'll be short considering that it's a work night. Inshallah. So I just wanted today, as we all heard, we heard our beloved dear Imam Hafiz Farhan recite the 25th juz. So I just wanted to share 2 points. We'll discuss just 2 ayat from the 25th juz, inshallah, and then we'll conclude. The first one that we'll discuss, as you can all see on the screen, is an ayah right on the first page of the 25th juz, right at the end of Surah Fussilat. Allah Ta'ala says, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِ بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. That we will show them our signs in the horizons and within their own selves, until it becomes increasingly manifest to them that it is the truth. And then, so this is the portion that I want to focus on today. So one of the enduring miracles of the Quran is that as time passes, with other maybe texts or historical texts, with the passage of time, you might have different discoveries or things like that that would disprove some of the things mentioned in the text. However, with the Quran, it's completely the opposite. The Quran is the enduring miracle of the Prophet ﷺ, the enduring miracle of Islam, because as time passes, we find more and more things that just serve to increase our conviction in the Quran. So Allah Ta'ala in this ayah says that we will show them our signs in the horizons and in their own selves, until it becomes increasingly manifest to them beyond the slightest shadow of a doubt that the Quran, that it is completely true. So I just wanted to share one example with you today of this due to lack of time. So there is, before Einstein, the dominant theory in physics, was primarily people relied on Isaac Newton. And under Newtonian physics, it was possible, physicists thought, and people pretty much accepted his theories, they accepted them. It was believed that it's possible for the universe to have existed infinitely. That it didn't necessarily need to have a definitive beginning, but the universe could have existed into pre-eternity. There could have been no beginning to it. Now, when we study the universe, and we study astronomy, we study cosmology, we see that there are certain things in the universe that are seemingly so fine-tuned, it seems extremely unlikely that the whole thing would come out by chance. But the idea was that if you have infinite time, infinite mass, infinite everything, then even if it's extremely unlikely for all of this just to assemble itself, for all of it to come together, then if you have infinite time, you have infinite tries. If you have infinite tries, then yeah, everything, it can come together. There's a famous thing that people say that if you have a bunch of monkeys and you give them computers, you give them keyboards, and they have infinite time, then eventually at some point they'll produce the complete works of Shakespeare. You hear that and it sounds crazy, because if you give a monkey or you give even a young child a keyboard and they start hitting at it, then will ever produce any one cohesive even paragraph? No. How about a page? No. How about entirely copying a sonnet of Shakespeare or a play of Shakespeare? No, it's not going to happen. What about the entire complete works of Shakespeare? No, that seems extremely unlikely. How is that going to happen? But the idea is that, well, if you have infinite time, then they have infinite tries, so eventually at some point it'll happen. So then it seems kind of strange, but if you think about it and there's actually infinite tries, then, well, I guess maybe it could happen, given those circumstances. So people would apply the same logic to the universe, saying that, well, if the universe existed pre-eternally, there was infinite time, then although it's extremely unlikely for all of this to come about by chance, But if you have so many tries, you have infinite tries, then eventually you might get it right at some point. So the fact that the universe exists is itself an indication that at some point everything just aligned, despite however extremely unlikely it might have been. But now, as the 20th century progressed, there was the development of what's called Big Bang cosmology. And then there are certain discoveries in astronomy and cosmology such that led physicists to now believe with basically certainty that the universe definitely had a definitive beginning. And actually time was not infinite, but rather the universe, we can say that it's about 13.7 billion years old. So although that's a long period of time, but it's still a far shot off of infinite time. It's a very finite piece of time. And now, without going into any details, one thing that we conclude when physicists, when they looked at it a little bit further, they realized that the chances for the universe, given this finite time, the chance for the universe to just emerge by itself, given all this fine-tuning, given all these universal constants, that if they were just a little bit different from the way they are right now, then life as we know it wouldn't be able to exist. They realized that it's extremely, extremely, highly improbable that the universe would come about by chance. So this is something that we didn't know before the 20th century, but then, after the development of Big Bang cosmology and things like that, Allah Ta'ala showed us His signs in the horizons. Allah Ta'ala showed us His signs in space. So people discovered what's called cosmic background radiation, they discovered what's called the redshift, and they realized that actually this Big Bang did happen, and it's really amazing. So from this we see that Allah Ta'ala showed us His signs in the horizons, in ourselves, and from these things, as time passes, it becomes increasingly clear to us that definitely the Quran is true. So this is an ayah that we can reflect on. Perhaps we can just take this ayah and continue to reflect on it, because the more and more we reflect on it, the more and more things will come to our minds, and we'll realize how the passage of time just shows more and more that the Quran is truly the enduring miracle of the Prophet ﷺ. And in fact, everything that we see around us confirms what Allah Ta'ala said in the Quran. Not that the Quran is in need of any confirmation, but it just serves to increase our conviction. Okay, so that's one ayah I wanted to share with you. The next one is a bit longer, but we'll just discuss it a bit briefly. Okay, so now this is in Surah Zukhruf, around the middle of the 25th juz. So the Kuffar of Makkah, they said, لولا نزل هذا القرآن على رجل من القريتين عظيم. Why was this Quran not revealed to some very wealthy person from one of the two cities, either Makkah or Ta'if? But why not some very wealthy person? Why not some person who was from the nobility? Why not, why was it somebody who wasn't very wealthy? Then Allah Ta'ala responds by saying, أَهُمْ يَقْسِمُونَ رَحْمَةَ رَبِّكَ. Is it they that distribute, or they determine who gets the mercy of Allah? The mercy of Allah over here refers to prophethood. Is it they that determine that? نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ مَعِيشَتَهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيَا. So over here it's very interesting. Here, I'll just put the translation. Do they distribute the mercy of your Lord? Over here, mercy refers to prophethood. Allah Ta'ala says, نَحْنُ قَسَمْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ مَعِيشَتَهُمْ فِي الْحَيَاةِ الدُّنْيا. They can't even allot material wealth. People can't even do that. Rather, we've taken that responsibility upon ourselves. They can't even allot that, let alone prophethood. So if people can't even determine who gets what in terms of material wealth, distribution of wealth, then of course, prophethood, it's a far shot off from that. Okay, so that's what Allah Ta'ala is saying. Then Allah Ta'ala says, وَرَفَعْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ دَرَجَاتٍ لِيَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُهُمْ بَعْضًا سُخْرِيًّا. And we have raised some of them, as you can see on the screen, we have raised some of them above others in rank. So that some people can take others, they can rely on others for for service. And Allah Ta'ala says, وَرَحْمَةُ رَبِّكَ خَيْرٌ مِمَّا يَجْمَعُ. So what we understand from this is very clearly that prior, I guess now it's sort of people have realized the folly of the theory, but in the first half, primarily in the first half of the 20th century and extending into the second half of the 20th century, there are two dominant economic theories. One was called capitalism, which I'm sure we all know of. The other one is called socialism, which eventually was sort of implemented in communism. right? And there are two superpowers of the time post-World War II. There was the United States, which we all live in, and then there was the USSR, the Soviet Union. And then they both had completely opposite, completely different economic theories and ways that they ran their governments. The USSR, the Soviet Union, was a socialist government, and the United States, of course, was capitalist. So now in socialism, what happens is that the distribution of wealth and stuff is not left to the people themselves, but rather it's the government that takes it upon their shoulders. And they decide who does what job. Everybody gets a fixed income. They ensure that there is basically equality, economic equality amongst everyone, amongst the whole population. But what we understand from these verses is that that's actually not something that's accepted in Islam, socialism. Not to say capitalism with all its implications is accepted either in Islam. Obviously, Islam puts some restrictions on it. You can't engage in any deceptive transaction. You can't engage in an interest-bearing transaction. Islam curbs some of the unbounded freedoms that a capitalist society has. However, the socialist system or the communist system is completely against an Islamic sort of economic system. Why? Because Allah Ta'ala says it's not for people to determine this allocation of wealth, the distribution of wealth. It's not for people to determine who works what. Rather, people themselves should determine it. Allah says that we're the ones that do it, meaning that Allah Ta'ala leaves it to the people, they themselves do it. So now we might think the socialist system, if we saw that post-World War II, the USSR was one of the superpowers of the world. It had a huge influence over many countries in the world. But suddenly, within a mere 40-something years after World War II, the Soviet Union suddenly collapsed. It should seem strange to us that after emerging as a superpower, suddenly within about 4.5 decades, the whole country just basically collapses. And that's because it was based on a system that's not sustainable. The socialist system is not sustainable because people are sort of forced to do things that they're not really maybe they don't want to do. Maybe a person's passion is medicine, but then they're like, you just be a laborer. So, and if everybody is not allowed to do what they want, and on top of that, everybody is given a fixed income, then people are not encouraged. They have no incentive to work basically to be productive. Why? Because whether they're productive or not, they're still going to get a fixed income. So in these things, in these ayat, Allah Ta'ala indicates to us why a socialist system is not something that is really desired in Islam. It's not something that Islam condones. Rather, in this whole idea of economic equality, it's not something that Islam necessarily condones. Allah Ta'ala says, وَرَفَعْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ فَوْقَ بَعْضٍ. Allah darajat. Allah has given some of you material wealth, greater material wealth than others. So Allah Ta'ala has raised some of you in rank over others financially, in terms of material wealth. So it's not desired in Islam that everyone is just completely equal in terms of economic distribution of wealth and things like that. Rather, Islam allows for some people to naturally people will have different abilities. Some people are going to be more productive than others. Some people are going to be maybe a bit more intelligent than others. Other people are stronger than others. So naturally people have different abilities. So now wouldn't it be completely unjust, given that people have different abilities, yet despite that, despite that the government or whatever says that despite the fact that one person is clearly more productive than the other, every single person has to get the same income. Then people would have really no incentive to work and be productive. So Islam recognizes that people have different abilities, and due to that, naturally, their financial remuneration for those abilities that they have, those skills that they have, it's going to be commensurate with their abilities. So there's naturally going to be some degree of disparity. So these are just a few reflections from these ayat. That we see, just to recap really quickly, we see from the first verse that the Quran is an enduring miracle of Allah Ta'ala, and if we look in the horizons, we look in ourselves, we see that definitely we'll find more and more signs, more and more things to increase our conviction. From the next set of verses, there's actually a little bit more, but due to lack of time, unfortunately, we won't be able to go into it. But we see from the second set of verses that Islam does not condone the whole socialist system of economics. Islam does not condone communism. Rather, Islam allows the market forces to operate pretty much as they are. However, Islam does curb it a little bit in saying that you can't engage in any interest-bearing transactions, you can't step on anyone else's toes, and things like that. So may Allah Ta'ala give us greater understanding of the Quran and allow us to act on all the dictates of the Quran. May Allah Ta'ala allow us to see His signs in the horizon in ourselves. Wa sallallahu ala nabi al-kareem.